They didn't fire me because I underperformed. They didn't fire me because of a complaint, a missed deadline, or a single client who wasn't happy. They fired me because the new owner's son-in-law wanted the office for his university roommate. That's it. 22 years, gone in 11 minutes. I want to be clear about something before I get into all of this. I'm not a bitter person. I've never been the type to hold grudges or spend weekends replaying arguments in my head. My wife will tell you that. My kids will tell you that. But what happened over those 4 months? From the morning they walked me out of that building to the afternoon I watched the whole thing collapse, changed something in me. Not in a dark way. In a clarifying way. Like when you finally get the right prescription for your glasses and you realize you'd been squinting at everything for years without knowing it. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is that I spent 22 years as a senior project manager at a mid-sized commercial construction firm in the Greater Toronto area. We weren't the biggest outfit in Ontario, but we had a reputation. We delivered on time. We didn't cut corners. When a client came to us with a project, whether it was a medical complex in Mississauga or a distribution warehouse in Brampton, they knew exactly what they were getting. And a large part of that consistency, I say without arrogance, was me. I had built relationships with 14 of our top 20 clients over the span of my career there. Some of those relationships went back 15 years. Some of them I'd kept through 3 ownership changes, 2 recessions, and a global pandemic that nearly gutted the entire industry. I knew these people. I knew the name of the project lead's daughter who was going to Dalhousie. I knew which clients needed weekly calls and which ones would call me at 7 a.m. on a Saturday and expect me to answer, and I always did. The founder, a tough, practical man in his early 70s who'd started the company out of the back of a pickup truck in 1979, had brought me in when the firm was going through a rough patch. He was the kind of man who shook your hand and meant it. He'd built this company on relationships and on not overpromising. I respected him enormously, and I think he respected me. He never said it outright, he wasn't that kind of man, but he kept me close, brought me into rooms I wasn't always technically supposed to be in, asked my opinion on things. That's how you know. 2 years ago he had a stroke. Not fatal, thank God, but serious enough that he had to step back. His daughter and son-in-law moved back from Vancouver to take over operations. The daughter I had met a handful of times over the years, quiet, analytical. She seemed competent enough, though she'd never worked in construction a day in her life. The son-in-law, I'll call him my new boss's husband because that's all he ever was to me, had spent the last decade bouncing between venture capital firms and tech startups in Kitsilano. He had an MBA from Queens. He wore those slim-cut suits that bunch up at the collar, and he used words like synergy and operational realignment without any apparent irony. He arrived in October. By November, he had business cards that said Chief Operating Officer. By December, he was sitting in on client calls he hadn't been introduced to. By January, he was restructuring the org chart. I tried to give him a fair shot, I genuinely did. I scheduled time with him in his first week, walked him through our active projects, gave him the context he needed to understand how our relationships worked, why certain clients needed to be handled a certain way, why we never sent junior staff to the Nakamura account without a senior lead. He listened. He nodded. He took notes on an iPad. I thought, okay, maybe this will be fine. Maybe he'll lean on the people who actually know what's happening. I was wrong. In February, he called me into a meeting, just me. No HR, which I thought was odd. He closed the door, sat down across from me, and spent about 4 minutes talking about the company's new strategic direction and the need to race-pipe the senior team for scalability. Then he slid a folder across the desk and told me my position was being eliminated. I remember sitting there for a moment just looking at the folder. I didn't open it right away. I looked at him and I said, "Can you explain what that means, specifically?" He said the company was moving toward a more centralized project management structure, and that my role would be absorbed into a new division being headed by someone he was bringing in. I said, "Who?" He said it was someone he'd worked with previously, someone he had confidence in. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I said, "I have active files on 9 projects right now. 3 of them are mid-build. 1 closes in 6 weeks. Who is going to manage the transition on those?" He said, "We'll handle it internally." I said, "With who?" "The person you're bringing in has never worked in this market." He said, "That's not your concern anymore." I want you to understand what that sentence felt like. 22 years. Not your concern anymore. I've thought about it 100 times since, and I still can't tell you whether it was cruelty or just obliviousness. With some people, you can never tell. He pushed the folder closer. Inside was a separation agreement, a non-disclosure agreement, a non-solicitation clause that was so broadly worded it would have prevented me from contacting former clients for 36 months, and a final check for 8 weeks of severance. 8 weeks. For 22 years. I picked up the folder, I looked at it carefully, and then I set it back down on the desk and I said, I'm going to need some time to review this with a lawyer. He nodded. He said that was fine. He gave me 2 weeks. I want to stop here and tell you something important, because I know some of you are watching this and wondering why I didn't sign. I've seen the comments on other videos, the debates about NDAs and non-competes. Some people will sign anything to get the check. I understand that. I have 2 kids. My youngest was in his 2nd year at the University of Guelph at the time. My older one had just bought a house with her partner in Hamilton, and I had promised to help with the down payment. I had a mortgage. I had RRSP contributions I was behind on. 8 weeks of severance on its own wasn't going to carry me very far. But here's the thing. The non-solicitation clause they put in front of me wasn't just aggressive. It was, according to the employment lawyer I called that week, almost certainly unenforceable in Ontario as written. Overly broad, no geographic limitation, no reasonable scope. She told me that signing it might not even hold up in court, but that fighting it would still cost me money and time I didn't have. She also told me something I hadn't considered, that I had no legal obligation to sign anything. I was already being terminated. They couldn't unfire me. I called my new boss's husband on the last day of my 2-week window and told him I wouldn't be signing the non-disclosure or the non-solicitation agreement. There was a long pause. Then he said, I'd strongly encourage you to reconsider. I said, I've reviewed it with counsel and I'm comfortable with my decision. He said the company reserved the right to pursue legal remedies if I violated any implied confidentiality obligations. I said, I understand. I'll be careful to operate within what the law actually requires. I was calm. I'm not saying that to sound impressive. I was calm because I was terrified, and calm was the only other option. I hung up the phone. My wife was sitting at the kitchen table. She looked at me and I looked at her and I said, okay, so we're doing this. She said, what's the plan? I said, I don't know yet. She got up, put the kettle on, and said, then we figure it out. That's 24 years of marriage right there. I spent the next 3 weeks in what I can only describe as a quiet fog. I updated my resume for the first time in over a decade. I reached out to a few industry contacts. I started looking at what a consulting arrangement might look like, whether there was a path to going independent rather than finding another corporate role. I was 53. Not ancient, but not exactly a fresh grad either. The market had changed, I knew it. I wasn't delusional about that. And then, about 3.5 weeks after my last day, my phone rang. It was the project lead from one of our longest-standing clients, a real estate development group out of Markham that I'd been working with for over 11 years. He didn't call the office. He called my personal hat for years. He said, I heard what happened. I want you to know that's not okay, and I want to know what you're planning to do next. I told him I was figuring things out. He said, well, figure them out fast, because I need to know if we're working together or not. Because if we're not, I'm going to have to find someone else, and I'd rather not do that. I thanked him and said I'd be in touch. He called me again 2 days later. Within 6 weeks of my termination, I had received calls from 9 clients. Not from me reaching out, from them calling me. 9 separate clients, some of whom I had known for a decade, who had heard through the industry grapevine that I was gone and wanted to know if I was available. A couple of them said outright that they had concerns about the transition at my former firm. One of them told me that the person brought in to manage their account had called them by the wrong company name in an introductory email. Another said she'd been waiting 3 weeks for a callback on a change order question and hadn't heard anything. I spoke to my lawyer again. I was careful. I did not solicit anyone. I did not reach out first. I did not say anything negative about my former employer. When clients called me, I listened. I told them what I was building, and I let them decide. That was it. I was operating exactly within what the law required and not an inch further. By the time I registered my consulting firm, I incorporated in Ontario in April. I had letters of intent from 7 clients. Within the first 90 days, that number grew to 11. I brought on a junior project coordinator who had also recently left the firm, a young woman who was frankly overqualified for what I was offering, but believed in what we were doing. What I want to say about those early months is that it was not glamorous. I was working out of our spare bedroom. I was on calls at 6:30 in the morning and sending emails at 11 at night. My wife converted our dining room table into a temporary filing system for 3 weeks, while we waited for our office lease to start. There was 1 week in June where I genuinely didn't know if we were going to make payroll. It was just me and one employee, but it still kept me up. My wife knew. She didn't say anything. She just started looking at our expenses and quietly canceled a few things she thought I hadn't noticed. I noticed. I never said anything either. That's how you get through it. By the fall, we had 14 clients. 14. And one day, I ran into a former colleague, someone who had stayed at the firm after I left, at a Tim Hortons in Burlington. He sat down across from me and he looked tired in a way that wasn't just about sleep. He told me what had been happening. The person brought in to replace me had quit after 8 weeks. No notice. Just gone. The 3 mid-build projects I had flagged in that termination meeting had all hit significant delays. One of them, a commercial build in Oakville, had gone over budget by nearly $400,000 due to scheduling errors that anyone with 6 months of field experience would have caught. 2 of the company's largest clients had issued formal notices of concern. One had threatened to pull out entirely. My former boss's husband had apparently been in meetings with lawyers trying to figure out who was liable. He had also been on a campaign to figure out whether I had poached any of their clients, as if a client calling me of their own free will constituted poaching. My lawyer sent a letter in August, after I heard they were making inquiries. Polite, clear, documented. They didn't pursue it further. By the following January, so roughly 10 months after they walked me out, my former firm went into receivership. I read the notice in the Ontario Business Registry database. The founder, who I had heard was recovering slowly at a facility in Niagara-on-the-Lake, apparently didn't know until it was done. Someone who knew both of us sent me a message saying the old man had cried when he found out. I sat with that for a while. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt sad, honestly. That company was built over 43 years. It had a lot of good people in it, most of whom had nothing to do with what happened to me. Some of them were out of work now. That's real. That mattered. But here's what I kept coming back to. I hadn't done anything to cause that. I had refused to sign a piece of paper. I had answered phone calls from people who chose to work with me. I had done good work. That's all. The receivership was the result of decisions made by people who weren't qualified to make them, and who refused to listen to the people who were. That's the whole story. That's all it ever is with these situations. The competence was there. They just decided it wasn't useful to them anymore. My consulting firm is now in its 2nd full year. We have 19 active clients. I have 3 full-time employees and 2 part-time contractors. We just signed a letter of intent with a client group in the Waterloo region that would be the largest contract we've had so far. I moved out of the spare bedroom about 14 months ago. We have a proper office now, in a low-rise building in Oakville. There's a boardroom table that fits 8 people and windows that look out over a parking lot, which is not glamorous, but it's mine. My son finished his degree in the spring. My daughter and her partner are doing well in Hamilton. My wife and I went to Portugal in September for the first time in years, just the 2 of us. We walked a lot and ate a lot and talked about things we hadn't had time to talk about properly in a long time. I think about that folder on the desk sometimes. The one my new boss's husband slid across to me in February. The non-solicitation clause. The non-disclosure. The 8 weeks. I didn't sign it. I don't say that as a victory lap. I say it because I think a lot of people in that situation feel like they have no choice. Like the only move is to take what's offered and disappear quietly. And I understand why. When you're 53 and your kid's tuition is due and your mortgage doesn't care about your feelings, the idea of walking away from even a small check is terrifying. I won't pretend otherwise. But what I know now, and what I wish someone had told me in that room, is that your value doesn't leave the building with your access card. The relationships you've built, the trust you've earned, the track record you've established, none of that belongs to the company. It belongs to you. You carry it with you. And the people who matter, the clients who actually know what you've done for them, they see that. They'll find you. The thing about integrity, and I know that sounds like a word people put on motivational posters, but stay with me. is that it compounds. Every time you did the right thing, every time you answered the Saturday call, every time you flagged a problem before it became a crisis, every time you told a client the truth when it would have been easier to tell them something comfortable, all of that adds up. It doesn't disappear because someone hands you a separation agreement. It just waits. It waited for me.